Welcome everyone once again. It's a very beautiful setting. It's nicer to be outside, isn't it?
It is.
Huh? Cool breezes are blowing. The fragrance of flowers is in the air. This world is a reflection of the spiritual world. So nature, as God has made it, inspires us to remember the transcendental realm. So, I received homework in the mail from a few students. It was very good. And the others gradually inched their way towards eternal damnation. So, thank you. So, in our last discussion together, we were looking at the epistemology of the Vedic culture. Epistemology is the philosophy of knowledge itself. When we understand something, when we try to understand, when we try to know something, and we acquire some knowledge, why do we believe that that knowledge is valid? Why do we accept it as true? So this is the subject of epistemology, the philosophy of the aspect of philosophy which is concerned with the acquisition of valid knowledge. So I want to give out some sheets which give an outline of the things that we covered in our last class. So if you can give this first part 1 out. Okay, we didn't print out so many, perhaps one between couples and so this is just a little summary of the discussion. The first, on the top of the page you can see the basis of the postulate that we can know things simply by applying our inductive and deductive logic, by empiricism, by our sensory perceptions and so on. This is the postulate. I can know, I can understand by my independent inquiries and investigations. And it seems like a very reasonable postulate, but in our last class we discussed how this postulate is based on a number of fallacies. The first one being the given premise fallacy, that in order to be reasonable or logical, come to a reasonable or logical conclusion about something, then first we have to ascertain some premises which are true, but we can't. There are no premises that we can prove conclusively are true. So we discussed that in some detail. So the first fallacy is the given premise fallacy. This fallacy is based on another fallacy, the corresponding qualia fallacy, that our senses correspond precisely with the objects that we're perceiving, both in nature and also in number. In other words, we have 5 senses and there are only 5 sense objects. There are only 5 possible things that can be perceived. So we have the right number of senses for the amount of categories that there are in reality. So in number and also in quality, that the way that our senses perceive things corresponds to the very nature of those things themselves. Of course, this is not true, and with a little introspection, we can quickly arrive at the conclusion that our senses are very limited, very inaccurate, and also there are many things that could possibly be perceived which we don't have senses to perceive. Even we gave the example of the birds and bats being able to, they constantly aware of the magnetic field of the earth and so on. So how many other things are there out there that we just don't know anything about? So the next one was the comprehensive categories fallacy, that when we perceive the world, we extract from the world categories, and then we use these categories to make sense of what we're seeing. So if there's something which exists, which is outside the categories that we're acquainted with, then we don't even have the intellectual tools to think about that subject. Because we think in terms of categories, and we spoke about points and lines, angles, number, identity, difference, and all the things which are not really our thoughts, but they're the scaffolding of our thoughts. They're the inner structures, they're the very conditions for the possibility of conceptuality itself. So, we only think that we can understand by our empirical approach and rational approach if we hold on to the fallacy that the categories with which I'm familiar are indeed a comprehensive inventory of all possible categories. Again, which is an absurd idea. Now, these two types of fallacies are also based on another fallacy, the fallacy of causal closure. And we discussed how a person considers themselves to have knowledge or to have understood something when they see, oh, here's an effect and I have located the cause. But they stop there without bothering to investigate further. But this itself, this cause that I have discovered, is itself the effect of another cause, which is itself the effect of another cause. Now, how far does that go? Where does that stop? We don't bother to know, but rather we make a causal closure at the point where the knowledge that we've acquired, some knowledge which fulfills our desire. If we desire something and we find some knowledge which seems to be able to fulfill that desire, then we make a close there. I don't need to know any further than that. Causal closure. Then the next one, the fallacy of universal applicability. You can see there. I've made some little logos there, and the logos are just a quick symbol to remind you of what the idea means. For example, the first logo is a logo of the inductive or deductive process of understanding the world, because that's about logical steps. So you can see there's some steps with an arrow going up, that we think that we can rise up to knowledge through the steps of our inductive and deductive reasoning. Then the next one, given premises fallacy, means that whatever, if you know A and you know B, then you can know what C is. But we don't know A or B, so we can't know what is C. So we have a little equation there with only made of question marks. The corresponding quality of fallacy there is you have a flower and an ear, a symbol of a flower and an ear next to it. So I've put that to illustrate the idea that if there were a person who is blind, they have no sense of smell, but they can hear. Then if someone spoke about the fragrance of a flower, then they would wonder, well, what does that sound like? fragrance doesn't sound like anything. Because that person's senses are less in number to the dimensions of the reality in which he finds himself. So he's helpless for understanding it. You see, so there's just a little graphic there to help you remember what it means. The corresponding qualia. The senses that we have now don't correspond to the dimensions of reality that exist. But they can. They can. There's a way of awakening the purified spiritual absolute senses also, but we'll be coming to that later. So there in the comprehensive categories fallacy, you can see there's a logo of an icon of a sphere passing through a two-dimensional plane, and we discussed that, how persons living in two dimensions, if a sphere would pass through their plane, they would experience it as something which didn't exist, and then which appeared as a dot, and then grew, shrank, and died. Something that was born, something that died, something that grew and withered away, whereas in fact none of those things are true, but that was just their vision of the subject from their limited perspective. And they have no other way of knowing the truth of that object, because their categories, they only have two dimensions, they don't have a third dimension. So we've used that icon as an example to illustrate the fallacy of comprehensive categories. So then calls a closer here, universal applicability. The idea that our experience, something which is true within our experience, will be true within all experience. It's, in other words, our current knowledge is universally applicable. And this is especially becomes relevant when we hear about Krishna. Because Krishna is a person. Right? We know so many persons, they're all fallible and limited. Krishna has a form. We have experience of so many forms. They're also conditioned and limited. And so on. So what happens is, as soon as a person who has not been sufficiently purified by the process of meditation, especially in bhakti yoga, when they hear about Krishna, then their material intellect immediately intercepts the discussion and filters it in terms of their own experience, because they think their own experience is universally applicable. Just like there was a man reading a book, and the dog came and sat down next to him, and the dog was looking at the man. The dog was thinking. He's been looking at that thing in his hand for a long time. When is he going to eat it? Right? That's what dogs do. First they see something, and then they start to chew it a little bit. That's 2 levels of investigation. And maybe they'll sniff it as well first, and then they'll try to eat it. Like that. So that's what dogs do. So the dog has his own way of thinking, his own way of behaving. And when he sees someone else, naturally he projects his experience onto that. The dog has no way of understanding that the man is looking at something in his hand. But what is this? Perhaps it's Treasure Island, and he's somewhere with some pirates in the Pacific Ocean, on some island somewhere, burying their treasure. He's sitting there, but he's in another world, and he's also involved with so many characters as well, and their interaction with each other, and he's also interacting with the book as well, thinking, what will happen next? What are the motivations behind the personalities and so on? So the dog has no idea of the dimensions of the experience of a human being who has a higher consciousness reading a book. And so, similarly, due to pride, we tend to think of ourselves as being the pinnacle of creation. And here, standing on top of the pinnacle of all existence, we can look down our noses at reality, and we have the power and capacity to figure it all out. But it's quite impossible. And as we appear to be, as a dog is thoroughly incompetent. His level of awareness is insufficient for understanding the higher realms. We are in a similar predicament. And the difference between that dog and the human reading the book is actually very small compared to the difference between us and the kingdom of God. That's a much greater difference, actually. So, the universal applicability fallacy. I've made an icon of a triangle drawn upon the surface of a sphere, because you remember that example, that the rules of geometry that apply, if you make a circle, the angles add up to 180 degrees. Always, except if you draw the triangle on a sphere or any three-dimensional object, then all the rules change. So things that seem to us to be very, very strictly defined and invariable rules, in a higher realm, they're simply not applicable. So then, the sixth fallacy that we discussed last week was the fallacy of impartial methodology. That the general opinion in regard to reason and rationale is that it's dispassionate and impartial. But the approach to understanding the truth through our reasoning power is anything but impartial. It embedded within that postulate is a dogma, a faith, a groundless faith in a far from proven doctrine. And that is that hidden within the suggestion that I can understand reality through my reasoning power is the premise that reality is devoid of personality. Because personality is that which is living, that which is alive, that which has feeling, is not subject to any type of the investigation. But rather, when a personality is pleased to share with you his secrets, then you can know them, otherwise not. If some military personnel capture some enemy person, if that person they're perceiving as their enemy doesn't want to talk, there's nothing they can do. Nothing at all. And so the path of the philosophical speculation carries within it the hidden premise, if we unpack it, that reality is not personal. And if we propose that reality is personal, then the only way to know that truth is by pleasing that person. That they become, that their heart will melt and they want to share their secrets with us. So that is one of the profound principles of the Vedic scriptures. It is said in the Upanishads, Nayam atma pravachanena labhyo na medayana bahuna sutena yameve se vrinute tena labhyas tasyai satma vivrinute tanam swam. The supreme reality cannot be discovered by intelligence. It cannot be discovered by so much studying, even of the Vedas, including the Vedas. It cannot be discovered by giving so many learned discourses, but rather that ultimate reality is discovered by that person to whom the ultimate reality chooses to reveal himself. And therefore, only devotion, bhakti, pure bhakti, provides us with the possibility of knowing the ultimate reality. So, 6, the impartial methodology fallacy. Now, what's holding all these fallacies together? What makes them, though they don't make sense, what makes us hold on to them? And that is the last one, the entitlement fallacy. Because I'm great, then I should know. I have the power and capacity to know everything. So that is to be blind to one's own limitations. It's called vanity or pride. Therefore, all spiritual knowledge begins with humility. The recognition of our own insignificance. Our minuscule nature in the theme of all things. Starts here. So you have your there. The homework should have looked something like that. But you came. The main themes. I was very pleased. The essence of the conclusion of it was there in the homework. So I was very pleased. So I hope this will help remind you. Now another thing we discussed in the last class was about the meaning of meaning. What is meaning? We talk about the meaning of life, but what is meaning first? Meaning is something which arises naturally from the relationship between a content, something that has, and its context. And we gave the example just of simple things like words. How a word means one thing, but in another context it means something else. In a broader context it means something else, and so on. So you remember these examples. We often give the example in relation to karma. That if an ordinary person will look around the world, then they see that the world is full of injustice. But if they could broaden their gaze by some degrees and see the past lives of everyone and also their future lives, then they would see that there's no such thing as injustice at all, but everything is unfolding in a harmonious way according to the will of God, and in response to every individual's own activities. So everyone is responsible at every moment for everything they think, say and do. So there's an example of how, if we look at the content of a moment or a situation, it seems to be one thing, but we'll understand the same situation in an entirely different way if we see the context, a broader context in which it's set, and so on. So meaning is a relationship between something, a content, and its context. And that's why in the Vedas, in the Bhakti tradition, Gyan, knowledge, is never just Gyan. It's called Sambandha Gyan. Sambandha Gyan means knowledge of relationship. Real knowledge is to know the relationship between myself and all existence. Everything. If we have a very narrow scope, what's my relationship with my immediate family or my country or so on, then on the basis of that sambandha, the relationship that we perceive, then we act. So our actions are a natural consequence of what we perceive to be sambandha gyan, our relationship with the context in which we find ourselves. So, as the meaning or the relationship changes depending on how broad is that contextual horizon. So what we need to do is to know who we are, what is the meaning of me, then we have to expand that contextual horizon to its limit, to the cause of all things, to God. And so the meaning of ourself is only known when we understand our relationship with God. So that is called Sambandha Gyan, knowledge of Sambandha relationship. So this is meaning. And it's meaning, it's the context which gives meaning to everything. And so the reason why the approach of trying to know the truth by our limited resources and intellect, the reason it makes sense to us is because its sense is guaranteed by the context of that idea. And the context of that idea is the given premise fallacies, that we think we know something to begin with. If you know something to begin with, then you can put it together and know something else. So, the idea that we know something to begin with, the given premise fallacies. And we think that there are given premises. Why? Because our senses are absolute. We are perceiving things the way they are. So if you look at these fallacies, the reason why the first one, the second one, the third one makes sense is because its meaning is guaranteed by the context of the next one and the next one. And so in this way, each individual in the world who thinks that they have the power to know and the power to understand, they can't break out of this. It's impossible for them to break out, because they're hemmed in by the context of many, many layers and layers of fallacy that gives them the impression that my convictions actually make sense. Understand? And so, that leads us to your next sheet here, which is the next part of the summary of the last class, and then we're going to move on.
How would you know which is true, Prem? The context and the content of a different religious system would have exactly the same logic that you just put forward.
Yeah, I will answer that question. It's a great question. Because when we speak about Vedic knowledge, we're speaking about universal religious principles. All the religions that we know of today have their historical origin a long time after the Vedic knowledge. So the Vedic knowledge was never written as a reaction or a response to some religious climate, like we see Christianity presented coming in the New Testament as a reaction to the ideas of the Old Testament, and Islam then coming along as a reaction to the ideas of Christianity and the Old Testament, and so on, and Buddhism appearing as a reaction to the cruelty of the Brahmanas who are misusing the Vedic system and doing so much animal sacrifice and so on. So ahimsa became the prominent doctrine in Buddhism and so on. But when we look at the Vedic knowledge, there are no competing doctrines or reactions to anything. There's no sectarian concern. Only the Vedas look at the universal principle of motivation. What is it that, why do we act? Why do we do anything? Either we do something to get something in this world, and that's called karma. We do something, perhaps we do some tapasya, some austerities, to get some supernatural powers, to heal others and so on. So rather than a mechanistic working to get something, but rather a mystical application to get some subtle powers. So that's a yoga siddhis. Or we adopt another path, and that is we take up a process to not enjoy the world either grossly or mystically, but rather to get out of the world, to be saved, salvation. So that's a desire for liberation. So these are the three paths. It's a universal thing, and you'll find them in every religion. Some people are praying to God to get something. Some people are praying to God to become mystical and heal people or whatever, impress them with their mystical powers. And others are praying to God to get salvation, to get out of this world. So all of these motivations, these three possible motivations are there. And they all have something in common. What is that?
Desires?
They're about me.
Yeah.
It's all about me. It has nothing to do with, well, God, how can I please you? So the fourth option is bhakti. So if there's any religion anywhere in the world, and bhakti, devotion to God, which is unmotivated and unconditional, is being presented, then that's what the Vedas are talking about, and so it's not a different religion. It's not different. So that's called in Sanskrit Jaiva Dharma. Dharma means the nature. Dharma is often translated as religion, but it really means, it comes from dri dhatu in Sanskrit, which means to hold. Everything is characterized by some quality that it holds and cannot let go. And if that quality were not there, it would not be that substance. For example, the dharma of sugar is to be sweet. The dharma of fire is to be hot, and so on. If it's not hot, it's not fire. If it's not sweet, it's not sugar. Like this. So what is the dharma of the jiva, the soul? Soul is called jiva, the living entity. So jaiva dharma, the nature, the quality of the jiva is devotion to God. And when the soul is not situated in his constitutional spiritual nature of devotion to God, then he becomes covered by maya. This maya is not really a thing. It's not reality, it's the absence of reality, just in the same way that darkness has no substance. Darkness is simply the absence of light. So when the consciousness is turned towards God, then there is reality. And when the consciousness is averse to, indifferent to, apathetic to the loving service of God, it's like if you look at the light, at the sun, you can't see your shadow. But if you turn away from the sun, you see your shadow. That shadow is not you. That shadow is a dim semblance of who you are. So when our heart is turned away from God, we see the shadow of the self, but not the actual self. So in that condition of seeing the shadows, maya, illusion, then our motivation is one of the three options. Either karma, you do for yourself, something worldly, yoga, the development of mystic powers, yog siddhi, or you try to get out of the world, negate it, renounce it, be detached from it. So, using this as the lens of interpretation, then you can take that lens of interpretation and look at any religious tradition or teachings and see to what extent the motivation is pure devotion, or to what extent it's mixed with the tendency for karma, jnana and yoga, fruit of activity, mystical powers, or simply emancipation, liberation, salvation. Like this. And where you find the motivation is only the pleasure of God and pure devotion, then that's what the Vedas are describing also. Same thing, just in another language. So now you have your second sheet, and you can see on that what I've done is, on the top it says the meaning of meaning is the relationship between content and context. So we have the icon in the center of everything there, which is the ascending process of deductive and inductive knowledge. And why it seems to make sense to us, because our thought is surrounded by the context of each fallacy. So each fallacy is shown there as being the context of the previous one, and the whole thing is all wrapped up in the entitlement fallacy. So you can see there's a paragraph underneath, just says that thus a rationale points conclusively to its own insufficiency as a methodology for investigating the absolute truth. The inability to acknowledge this obvious fact is a delusion arising solely from vanity. Such a state of bewilderment involves the postulate that I can understand, based on a fallacy within a fallacy within a fallacy, and so on. The receding horizon of so many layers of context provide a sense of meaningfulness to the essentially absurd postulate. Therefore, genuine knowledge begins with humility. So that paragraph is just a summary of what this diagram represents. Now, it seems that we've exhaustively discussed all the reasons why we cannot know by our intellectual endeavors. But there is another reason. And this reason is distinct and separate from the previous reasons, in the sense that the previous reasons are rationale interrogating itself, essentially. We're only using rationale to establish the limitations of rationality. So, and this is why I've separated this point, because this point is only a conclusion that can be understood when we take another path of understanding, and that is to receive knowledge. That's not the ascending process of climbing up steps by our own strength, but the descending knowledge. The ascending knowledge in Sanskrit is called Aroha Panta. Aroha Panta. Panta means path and Aroha means ascending. Aroha Panta, the path of lifting yourself up step by step by your intellectual endeavor. That's Aroha Panta. And its counterpart, spiritual counterpart, is called Avroha Panta. Avroha. If you know Indian music, then you'll know these terms, because when you sing Sa Re Ga Ma Pa Da Ni Sa, this is the Aroha Panta, and when you sing Avaroha, coming down. So the Vedic system is Avaroha Panta. The knowledge descends to us. It's perfect and complete from the very beginning, and it comes down to us from the cause of all causes, from the Supreme Lord Himself, in the form of Krishna Himself, or Lord Narayan, imparting the vibration of the Vedas to the Devatas, to Brahma, to the higher beings, and then in Parampara over the millions and millions of years, through the Guru Parampara, it comes down and we receive it. Now, it's not that this Avaroha Panta, or the descending process of knowledge, indicates the absence of intellectual capacity. No. Those who follow the Avaroha Panta, they are truly intellectuals, because they've discarded the path which will not lead anywhere. Yet their intellect is still functioning, but it's functioning in the way of, it's used to understand the perfection of the knowledge which is coming to us through the Avaroha Panta. So we can give an example here. And here is the example. And that is that in the Avaroha Panta, we are told from the beginning that we are Atma, we are the soul. And that in this world our soul is covered by two bodies. A gross physical body composed of earth, water, fire, air and space, and also a subtle body, Shukshma Sharira, that is called Shukshma, or Ling Sharir, composed of Manas, Buddhi, Ahankar and Chitta. Mind, intelligence, ego and Chitta, the screen of consciousness, if you like, the screen upon which we see the projection of the world. So now, if we simply accept this perfect knowledge of the Vedas in the Avaroha Panta coming down to us, now apply your intelligence to that, and you'll see a glaring reason why the process of unaided intellect, the ascending process, doesn't work for understanding about the self and God. And the reason is this. If you'll think about it, the soul being covered by the gross physical body and the subtle body of mind, intelligence and ego, then you'll understand why the Aroha Panta, the ascending process of deductive and inductive reasoning, cannot possibly supply us with valid knowledge. And the answer is this. Just as the indulgence in sense gratification entails the absorption of our spiritual consciousness in the gross physical body, so similarly, the unaided philosophical speculation is absorption of the soul who is transcendental in the covering of the subtle mental and intellectual body. And therefore, we're trying to understand God and the self, which are both beyond matter, by diving headfirst into material energy. Is that clear? Is that clear? Did everyone catch it? Because I'm going to repeat it.
Oh, good.
I'll repeat it. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll give a very simple example. You are looking for a horse, but you're not sure what a horse is. And so, you put on your goggles and breathing apparatus and go into the ocean looking for a horse. Now you are not going to find a horse in the ocean, because the horse lives on the land. And as long as you are immersed in the ocean, you will not find a horse. So in the same way, the soul is transcendental and beyond matter, both in its gross and subtle forms. God is also transcendental and beyond matter in its gross and subtle forms. So the human beings who are, though they are souls, their consciousness is absorbed in only sense gratification, trying to taste the world. Because their consciousness is absorbed in the gross body of earth, water, fire, air and space, therefore they cannot find either themselves or God. But in the same way, those who simply engage in the philosophical speculations, then the consciousness which is transcendental is absorbed, not in the gross body, but absorbed in the fluctuations of the subtle body, composed of mind, intelligence and ego. These are material elements. So the very act of philosophizing without the aid of the Vedic teaching and Guru is the spiritual soul absorbing himself in matter, only a subtle form of matter, instead of the gross matter, the subtle matter. So when a person who is under the influence of ego, they have no idea that their mind is external to the self. When we do meditation, then we come to that stage of, instead of the mind being the subject and the world being the object, then our mind becomes the object. And we are situated in Atma and the self is the subject. When we become mindful and watch the movements of our mind, the thoughts and feelings which are going on in the mind are the karmic reactions, the desires, vasanas and tendencies emanating from ahankar, the ego in the subconscious, and coming into the conscious mind. But until we have the Vedic knowledge that allows us to become familiar with the categories which are beyond our experience, and then to act on that sambandha gyan, we're discussing how all action is a result of our relationship with the environment that we know. So the Vedas tells us about our true context, God and the spiritual world, and our relationship with God and the spiritual world. And though we're here, we begin to act on that platform. And then when we act on that, slowly the consciousness becomes purified, and we can gradually understand that just as the animals are absorbed in only the consciousness of tasting, that we ourselves are absorbed, the spiritual soul, in just the fluctuations of the mind which are going on according to past lives karma and sanskars, impressions, vasanas, desires and so on, like this. So here's a summary of this last point, and this last point illustrates why we cannot know by the arohapan, so by the ascending process, and it's also a performative. That the point itself shows us that if we just add a little Vedic knowledge, transcendental knowledge, to the equation and examine that with our intelligence, then we can come to valid conclusions. Because we have now, everything begins to unwind, because we actually have some given premises, some premises which really are true. Now you have some premises which really are true. Now you actually become a valid intellectual, because you can start thinking, what are the consequences of those valid premises? You see? So the descending process is not an anti-intellectual process, but rather the intellectual process is included in that, but with integrity, without vanity, without self-delusion. So I'll just read that last paragraph. Yet there is also a metaphysical reason for the failure of human intellect to ascertain the nature of reality. The mind and body constitute coverings of the soul. So just as acts of sense gratification entail absorption of the consciousness in the body, similarly, philosophical speculation entails absorption of the consciousness in the subtle material covering of the mind, both of which conceal rather than reveal the nature of the soul and the Supreme Soul. Is that clear to everyone? Now we'll move on to today's class. Today I want to introduce you to some sutras of Vedanta. Yes. After compiling in writing all the mantras of the Vedas 5,000 years ago, Vyasadeva, Krishna Dvaipayam Veda Vyas, he dictated the Vedas to Ganesh. They were written down. The Vedas existed before that, since the beginning of this particular cycle of creation and destruction. But because Kali Yuga, this age was about to begin, and was just beginning 5,000 years ago, due to the gradual diminishing of piety among the people, their powers of memory also will be reduced. Memory is a reflection of the steadiness of our chitta. When our chitta, our consciousness is steady, then whatever touches it leaves impression that can be recalled in a moment. And so persons whose chitta is disturbed, in other words, they lack in the power of attention, those who have not the power of attention do not have the power of retention. They can't remember. That's why the restless, turbulent children, they're slow at learning. They can't learn anything because they can't remember anything. And conversely, when the more steady the mind is, the more powerful is the power of retention. So Vyasadeva saw that in the future, even the most qualified persons will be incapable of memorizing simply by hearing the thousands and thousands of mantras of the Vedas. So he decided to write them down and also divide them into sections, and then entrust 4 of his prominent disciples each with one department of the Vedas. So one disciple became the professor of the Rig Veda, another of the Yajur Veda, of the Sama Veda, and the Atharva Veda, and another became the professor of the Puranas, which is composed of the mantras which were left over after the original departmentalization of Rig Veda, Sama Veda, Yajur Veda, and the Atharva Veda. So after doing all that, Vyasadeva, he wanted to summarize the Vedas in a sutra text. And the sutra text is it's a series of very short, terse codes. And a sutra means a thread. So each code gives an idea which is connected to another idea. And if you follow the thread of ideas, you'll quickly come to Vedanta. Vedanta means Vedanta. Anta means the last thing, the end, the conclusion. So Vedanta means Vedanta, the conclusion of all knowledge. So you follow the sutra, the thread, and it will bring you to the conclusion of all knowledge. So there are 550 sutras, and it's quite demanding study. Actually, even that, though it's the summary, it's quite a demanding study. So what I did was, I extracted from 550 sutras only 5. And if you learn, and actually these are not even full sutras, some of them are full and some of them are just part of a slightly longer sutra. So, but I guarantee you that if you can commit to memory these 5 sutras, you will know Vedanta, the conclusion of the Vedas, in only 5 sutras. So the conclusion of the Vedas is Prem, divine love, actually. So I've just given a title, Prem Sutra. Now, the first sutra is Tarka Patishtanat. And so you've already learnt the meaning of that sutra, because that's what the previous class and this summary of the previous class was all about. Vedanta tells us it's Tarka Apatishtanat. The word Tarka means reason, logic, argument, debate, in order to establish a conclusion. So Pratishta means a foundation. And here we have the word Tarka plus Apratishta, without foundation. So logic has no foundation. In other words, reasoning appears to be sound, but when you examine it deeply, then, as we saw, it's buried in layers and layers and layers of delusion, actually. So, Tarka Pratishtanat. So this first sutra we're presenting is, on the one hand, dismissing the rational empirical approach to understanding reality, and confirming the Avarohapanta, the validity of Shabda Brahma. Shabda Brahma means spiritual sound. Brahma means spiritual, and Shabda means sound. The Vedas are Shabda Brahma, spiritual sound, which is received in the Guru Parampara. So all the methods of acquiring knowledge, such as sense perception, reason, and testimony, historical testimony, and so on. In the Jiva Goswami's Tattva Sandarbha, there he describes that essentially all types of knowledge that we gather come in 10 different ways, which include, of course, sense perception, hearing historical testimonies, the absence of perception above, that's another one. For example, if you come home and you see that your car is not there, then you can know that someone has stolen it. So the absence of we also learn things from the absence of a perception, and so on. And inclusion, this is called sambhav. For example, if you could say, all men are mortal, and Socrates is a man. And so because Socrates is included in the categories of men, and because men are mortals, then you can conclude Socrates is mortal, like this. So this is a logical technique called sambhav in Sanskrit. So there are 10 different categories, 10 ways in which we receive knowledge. And all of them are fallible, except for Shabda Brahma, the reception of the Vedic knowledge from Guru in a parampara, in the ancient tradition. Now, some persons say, well, surely that can't work, because over the generations the interpretation will change. Why should I believe in the validity of a knowledge which has been passed down for thousands of generations? It could be like Chinese whispers. Right? Someone tells something to someone else, and they kind of they get some of it right, but some of it wrong, and they tell it to the next person, and in the end, the game Chinese whispers? Someone whispers to someone, it goes around the room. There's a historical example. In the First World War, the soldiers were at the front in the trenches, and one of the commanders was in the front, and he wanted to send a message to the reinforcements in the rear, and all the communication lines were broken, so they had to send the runners. So the runners would jump up out of the trenches and run through no man's land, and then drop into another trench, and then someone would tell the message there, and then another runner would go there. So they had a system of runners to get the messages backwards and forwards in the trenches. So the commander at the front said to the runner, "Send reinforcements, we're going to advance." And the runner got up and he went running. And he dropped into the next trench and spoke to, and then the next runner got up and like this. So by the time the last runner got far away to where the other soldiers were out of the battle, he came with a message. Send 3 and 4pence, we're going to a dance. So 3 shillings and 4pence. Send 3 and 4pence, we're going to a dance. What does that mean? So that's the example of how gradually in time messages get lost. Right? So a person might say, okay, I admit it, my Arohapan to my ascending method might be risky, but I'd rather put my trust in that than this Chinese whispers coming down over thousands of years. Who's to know that what we're learning today is really the true message of the Vedas as it was intended all those years ago? Someone may put forward that idea. It's not valid. Why? Because this is Shabda Brahma. Shabda Brahma means spiritual sound. The spiritual sound is different in nature to the material sound. The material sound is spoken and heard and can be misunderstood. So many intellectuals in the recent times, in the postmodernists, philosophers have discussed about the impossibility of communication. That communication is impossible because there's no way of knowing that when I say something, that when you hear it, then that you feel that it means the same thing that I feel that it means. And that's been elaborately discussed in postmodernist literary criticism. Most notably the treatise of Jacques Derrida, the French philosopher, called The Postcard. So, the impossibility of communication. Okay. Shabda Brahma is not like that. When we speak ordinary sounds, there is a chance that they can be misunderstood. But when the Guru imparts a mantra to the disciple, along with some guidelines of how to practice, how to remember and meditate upon that mantra, then, as the Guru is seeing the very substance of that mantra, Sri Krishna, he gives the mantra to the disciple, then the mantra cultivates bhakti, by which that sound vibration opens and reveals the very same Krishna that the Guru was seeing when he gave the mantra. In other words, this sound of the Vedas is not a description of something, but the sound is itself intrinsically the very thing, because it's absolute. That is the meaning, the true meaning of Advaita. Advaita, that which is beyond duality. That the sound vibration of the Vedic mantra is itself the very substance which it seems to be describing when you hear the sound from a relative position. But when we cultivate the sound vibration, the mantra given by Guru, under Guru's guidance, then the contact with that Shabda Brahma becomes a direct communion and direct experience of the subject. So there is no question of the gradual degradation or corruption of the message of the Vedas, because it's not a message, it's a direct experience which is communicated through the Shabda Brahma from Guru to disciple. Understand? That's why it's the same. It never changes. So, Sutra 1, can everyone repeat? Tarka apratishtanat. Tarka apratishtanat. So, Tarka means logic, argument, reason, debate. Pratishta. Sta, actually sta in Sanskrit is the English cognate is stand. That which stands, sta. So pratishta, foundation, that on which you stand, this is apratishta, without foundation. So tarka apratishtanat, the two words joined together become tarka apratishtanat. So that is your first sutra of the Vedas, and that sutra, how much knowledge is packed into that code. All the things that we've discussed and much more is included. Tarka pratishthanat. All the fallacies we've discussed and so on, and their concomitant conclusions, their consequences, are the ramifications of this sutra. The purport and explanation of this sutra alone. Tarka pratishthanat. And so this sutra is invalidating the Arohapanta and validating the Avarohapanta. Okay, so there's your first sutra, Tarka pratishthanat. Now we'll move to sutra number 2. Atmakrite parinamat. Parinam means transformation. And Atmakrite means made by the self. Here Atma has many meanings. Sometimes it refers to Jivatma, the individual, and sometimes it refers to Paramatma, the Supreme Soul. In this context of the sutras, it refers to the Supreme Soul. It means that the world, all existence that we see, is parinamat, coming from the transformation, Atmakrite, of the Atma, the Supreme Lord. So this is our next meditation. After leaving behind the mental and intellectual planes, after leaving behind the tendency to see the world through our speculations, we take the lens of interpretation of the Vedas, Atmakrite parinamat, and see the world. Everything is the transformation of God's energy. So we have to really begin there at all moments. Try to be aware of that. Try to be aware of that. Vedanta is considered to be in the Vedas part of Gyan Kanda. That means the philosophical discussion aspect. And it leads to bhakti, because that's where it should all go. Karma yoga should lead to Jnana yoga, should lead to everything, to bhakti yoga in the end. So this is, at this state, at this part of Vedanta, it's still the Jnana Kanda, and one aspect of Jnana yoga is to be aware that everything is a transformation of God's energy. The cause behind every effect that we see, if we trace it back, is nothing but God. God is behind everything. And because the effects are non-different from the cause, therefore, in one sense, God is everywhere and is everything. The classical example in Vedic education is the example of a clay pot. The clay pot is made of earth. The cause of the clay pot is the earth. And therefore, wherever the clay pot goes, and whatever it does, it can never be separated from the earth. Because the cause, the effect itself, is composed ultimately of nothing but the cause. So in the same way, God has created the world. But from what? Christian theologians posit that ex nihilo, that God created the world out of nothing. And in one sense, we can say it's true, in the sense that the world didn't exist before, so it seems like it was created out of nothing. Ex nihilo. But actually no, God has multifarious energies. And one of his energies, that is the material energy, by his will, transforms and becomes this world. And so because the effect is non-different from the cause, God is everywhere and in everything. So these sutras are very useful. You see, if you just wake up in the morning, say Tarka pratishthanat, okay, that's it. Your soul comes off the mental platform, off the platform of speculation. Then Atmakrite parinamat, all things are the transformation of God's energy. Then immediately you become alert. You're awake, you're conscious, in touch with reality. Only 2 sutras and you're there. Of course some purification will have to take place to stay there. To be naturally there as a moment by moment experience. But to be there even somewhat artificially or by force of will is a starting point, like a child learning to walk. At first they cannot walk. It's difficult for them. Yet with a little practice, it's natural because it's their potential to walk. So in the same way, we are souls, so it's our natural potential to be conscious of God all the time. Just in our conditioned state, we get up and fall down and get up and fall down. It requires some practice, though it's our natural condition. So Atma Krite Parinamat. The world is the transformation of the divine energy of God. My pranams, Balaram.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Sorry I'm late, I spaced out.
Uh-huh.
I was fixing a fence and I kept fixing it.
So, I'm in a state of indecision now because I find myself in the middle of an ocean and don't know which direction to go. Or how deep.
Got a life belt? If in doubt, chant.
Okay, I'll go off on a little digression here. It's connected with the sutra. This sutra is very, very famous in India. Why? Because it's a source of a great controversy. And that is the most well-known exponent of Vedanta for the last since the 8th century, 8th and 9th century, has been Shankaracharya. So Shankaracharya, he put forward what is really a non-Vedic idea. He appropriated the message of the Vedas with his commentary called Shariraka Bhasya. And his philosophy was called Kevala Advaita, which means Kevala Advaita, how would you say? Kevala means unalloyed. Kevala, exclusive, unalloyed Advaita, and here Advaita, the sense is monism. Kevala Advaita, unalloyed monism. That there's only one reality, and that is Brahman, and it is a light, and nothing else exists. Even this world doesn't exist. This world is not an illusion in the sense of it's something that you don't understand, you have an illusory understanding of it, but rather it simply doesn't exist at all. You know, there's a difference. For example, if you see a rope in the dark and you think it's a snake, then you're in illusion. But your illusion has some basis in reality because you've misunderstood something that actually exists. But Shankar's idea is that in the dark you see a rope and think it's a snake, but actually the snake doesn't exist, the rope doesn't exist, and you don't exist, even the dark doesn't exist, nothing exists. The whole thing is just fully. So that's called Vivartavad. Vivartavad, the theory of illusion. So now, for Vivartavad to exist, then this world is not a transformation of God. God doesn't create, the world is not real. And so this sutra says, Atma Krite Parinamat, that the world is a transformation of Atma. This means Paramatma here, of God, or the Supreme Truth. So Shankara, according to his philosophy, said, well, that's not possible because Brahman, or the Supreme Truth, is a oneness which is beyond, which can never transform, which is without transformation. It's without qualities, without personality, without Shakti, without potency at all. So there's nothing to transform. It's a complete illusion. So even though the Shankara was appropriating the authority of Vedanta, on this sutra he commented that Vyasadeva has made a mistake. So then, that's undermining. I'll just keep something on top of it. Thank you. That's undermining the authority of the Vedas and his own case, because he's trying to prove his opinion on the basis of Vedanta. So in the history of Vedanta in India, Shankar, this sutra is very famous because on the one hand Shankar accused Vyasa of making a mistake, and on the other hand the followers of Bhakti point out that Shankar is invalidating his own position by discrediting his evidence, Vedanta itself. So Now we'll come to the true interpretation of Atmakrite Parinamat. In the Vishnu Purana, it is said, Vishnu Shakti Tata Prapta Keta Gakya Yata Para Avidya Kama Sangyanya Tritiya Shakti Ishyate. No, the Supreme Reality has Shakti, potency, and this potency acts in different ways, and according to the action of that potency, it takes on different names. So one aspect of the Shakti, the potency of the Supreme Truth, is called Parashakti, the transcendental spiritual energy, Parashakti. The other one is Avidya, or Maya, ignorance, the material energy. And the other one is Ketra Gya. Ketra means the field, and Gya means the knower. So Krishna uses the same words to discuss the Jiva in Bhagavad Gita. He calls the soul Ketra Gya, the knower of the field. In other words, this world and our body and mind are the field, and the soul is none of those things. He's the consciousness situated within the field that is aware of the field. So you are not any of the things that you're aware of. You're just the awareness. Just the awareness. But not the things that... You're not the content of your consciousness. You're just the consciousness. So the soul is called Ketra Gya, the knower of the field. So the Vishnu Purana is telling us that there's the spiritual energy, the material energy, and the marginal energy, that is us, the souls. So the souls are called marginal, or Tatastha Shakti. Also, Tatastha Shakti means situated on the margin between the two worlds. Because by our free will, we can move in either world. And so all of us who are here, we have, in one sense, misused our free will. And therefore we find ourselves. We are the Ketragya, the knower of the field, the Tatastha Shakti, the marginal potency of God, and we've become involved with the material energy by our will, and by our will also we can turn around and become situated in the spiritual energy. So remember the meaning of this sutra. Atma Krite Parinamat means everything is a transformation of the energy of God, but there are three broad categories: the spiritual energy, the material energy, and us, the marginal potency, the Jiva Atmas, the souls. But we are now, by our will, by our willpower, we have situated ourselves in the shadow. We have turned away from the continuous, uninterrupted, unconditional, and unmoted loving service of the all-loving, compassionate, sweet and attractive Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna, and thus we have become lost in the shadows of the material energy. So Atmakrite Parinamat, this is our second sutra. Can everyone say that?
Atmakrite Parinamat.
Parinamat means from the transformation. Krite, Atmakrite means of the Atma, the self, the Supreme Self, Krite made. This ending ehe is a genitive in Sanskrit. So the implication here is that everything, Parinamat, is a transformation, Atmakrite, of the Supreme Self, made by the Supreme Self. So the world is the transformation of divine energy. Now we come to the third sutra, a very important sutra of Vedanta. Guham pravistav atmano. That's a part, the rest of the sutra. Guham pravistav atmano hi darshayati. So it means, Guham means a cave or a secret place. Pravistav is an adjective. It means entered. And Atmano is the word Atma, soul, but O is the dual case in Sanskrit. Just as in English we have singular and plural, but in Sanskrit you have singular, dual and plural. In the genitive case. How do we make the genitive case in English? If we make a noun, put a noun in the genitive.
What's genitive?
Like dog.
Just take the word Krishna and put it in the genitive case in English.
Krishna's.
Krishna's. Krishna. Genitive means possessive case. Whose is this flute? It's Krishna's. Yeah? So the genitive case makes something possessive, like that. So you see, the English is the same as Sanskrit, because the Sanskrit genitive case is asya. In Sanskrit you would say Krishnasya. It's Krishna's. So that's why in English we have an S to make nouns into genitive, because the Sanskrit asya. It's S, but there's a y sound as well. Asya. It's Krishna's. In English, Krishna's, and in Sanskrit, Krishnasya. So again, we see how Sanskrit is our mother language. So, but in Sanskrit, there's a singular, plural, and a dual case as well. So the dual case is here on the word Atma, and also on its qualifying adjective pravista. So it becomes pravistav atmano. Guham pravistav atmano hi. Means certainly Atmano, two souls, two atmas, pravista, have entered Guham, the secret place or the cave. And that means Guha in the Vedas refers to the heart is like a cave. Because just as a cave in a mountain is a secret, inaccessible place, so similarly, our deep subconsciousness, the deep levels of our subconsciousness is like a secret cave, and the soul is living there. But Vedanta Sutra is telling us very clearly, Guham pravistav atmanohi. Actually, you're not alone. There are two souls living there. And that is Paramatma. That God is with us at all times. I'm not saying that metaphorically, poetically, allegorically, literally. Literally and absolutely. As our soul is there within the region of the heart, in the cave, which our aspect of our consciousness of which we are not conscious, subconscious if you like. Soul is there, and right next to the soul is Krishna, the Supreme Soul. Two are there. And so this every sutra of Vedanta is an explanation of different parts of the Vedas. So what the commentators do, it's very interesting, the history of the commentaries on Vedanta Sutra. We spoke about the Shariraka Bhashya of Shankaracharya, which is inconsistent and unacceptable. But there are some wonderful commentaries like the Sri Bhashya of Ramanuja, the Madhva Bhashya of Madhvacharya, and Nimbarka's, I think it's called Parijat Bhashya. And there are many, the Govinda Bhashya of Baladev Vidyabhushan is the Gaudiya commentary in the line of our Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And the skill, the art of commenting on the Vedanta Sutras is, out of all the thousands of mantras of the Vedas, when you see a sutra, to say, okay, this sutra is about this mantra. You have to identify what Vyasadeva is discussing. And here, this particular sutra is in relation to a mantra of the Vedas which appears in several places. It's in the Rig Veda, it's in some Upanishads as well, I believe Katha Upanishad and Svetashvata Upanishad. And that is the mantra Dwa Suparna Sayuja Sakhaya Samana Vriksham Parishashvajate, which says two birds are on the same branch in a tree, and one bird is tasting the fruit, and the other one is simply watching. And when the bird who is tasting the fruit turns to his friend, then he discovers all happiness. So in this example, the body is the tree, the branch is the heart, the two birds are you and Krishna in the heart, and we are the souls concerned with the fruit of the tree, that is the enjoyments that the physical body has to offer within this plane. And so being absorbed in that, we forget that our friend is right there. But when we turn our attention to our friend, our eternal friend, then we find all happiness. So, in Bhagavad Gita chapter 6, there Sri Krishna discusses Dhyana Yoga. And we gave some examples of the practice of Dhyana Yoga there in the Prana festival. So all these types of yoga, they should lead to bhakti. So in Dhyana Yoga, the yogis do pranayama and asanas, and they meditate on the syllable Om in the Mooladhara chakra and raise this whole meditation that we practice there in the Prana festival. And then their consciousness is focused in the heart, and there they search out Paramatma. And when they open their eyes, though they don't see Paramatma, because they've raised their awareness by this process, they're aware that everything is the effect of Paramatma at all times. And that's called Gyan. That's called Gyan. So Gyan arises by the performance of Karma Yoga, by Dhyana Yoga also. We have to come to that platform of Gyan, knowledge. And Gyan means to know, to be aware at every moment that everything is the effect of Paramatma. Just like it's light now. You can't see the sun. I can't see the sun from where I am. You can't see the sun, but you know that it's light because the sun is there. And you're always aware that when it's light, it's because the sun is there. So in the same way, Gyan means to, just as it said in the Gayatri mantra, Om Bhur Bhuvah Swaha Tat Savitur Varinyam. The Brahma Gayatri tells us that God is the sun. And that which is everything is energy emanating from God. So everything that you see proves the existence of God. Because if there were no God, there would not be anything to see. Because everything is the Atma Krite Parinamat, everything is the energy of God. So that when that consciousness comes, and we're aware every moment that all things are God's energy, He is the cause behind the effects and non-different from those effects as well. That's called Gyan. But Gyan becomes Vigyan. Gyan becomes Vigyan when you don't so much see the effects, but you actually see the cause. That everywhere you look, you see the Paramatma. So the yogis are looking for Paramatma Vishnu in their heart. And by their meditation, when they actually, by long meditation, they see Paramatma in their heart. Then afterwards, when they open their eyes, they see Paramatma everywhere. The very Paramatma is a Vishnu form with 4 arms, holding a lotus flower and chakra, blazing chakra, discus, and conch shell and mace. You can see all over the world the monarchy, the symbols of the monarchy. Like if you go to the Tower of London, there the Queen's, the crown jewels are there. The Queen has an orb and a scepter. These are the symbols of Lord Vishnu's symbols of authority. The chakra and the gada. The scepter means a mace, like this. So we see that in ancient times, these were recognized as the symbols of authority. It's coming from the Vedic culture. So the Paramatma realized yogi sees in his heart and everywhere else, literally, the beautiful form of Paramatma Vishnu, holding the lotus flower, mace, club, the conch and chakra in his hands. Beautiful curling hair, lotus eyes, smiling with such a compassionate smile, decorated with a shining divine ornaments. So in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna said, Yo mam passati sarvatra sarvam chamai pasyati tasya hamna pranasyami sachamena pranasyati. For that yogi who through the process of dhyana yoga has become Paramatma realized, for that yogi who sees me, Krishna, everywhere, he sees me everywhere and sees all things as existing within me. I am in everything and everything is in me. He sees. That yogi, I am never lost to him and he is never lost to me. Tasya ham na pranasyami sachamena pranasyati. I am never lost to him, he sees me everywhere and he is never lost to me. I also see him. So there Krishna is describing in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita how the jnana yogi, when his dhyan, his meditation becomes mature, shifts to bhakti yoga. You see? What does it mean? Tasyaham na pranasyami sachamena pranasyati. I am never lost to him and he is never lost to me. The meaning is this, that yogi, when he was doing his yoga sadhana, he may not be aware fully of the conclusions of Vedanta and Bhakti, but he followed anyway the process of dhyana yoga, has its own inherent elements of Bhakti. Ishvara Pranidan, the spirit of surrender to God, is part of the process of dhyana yoga, and so on. And then when he comes to Paramatma realization, and he sees the beauty of the Paramatma, he changes his mind, because before he wanted that his soul would merge with the Paramatma and everything would become one. That is Kaivalya. It's also an option. Anyone can take it if they want. That's an option. But that is not our soul's highest potential. We're not made for that. But if someone wants that the soul will enter into Paramatma and then have the experience of the extinguishing of their individuality, they can have that. That's called Sayuja Mukti, or the liberation of merging. One's individuality is not actually destroyed, because it cannot be. The soul is an eternal individual being. Only your experience of your individuality is lost. And this is why Krishna is saying, for one who sees me everywhere and everything in me, for that dhyana yogi, I am never lost to him and he is never lost to me. Means that when he sees the beauty of the Paramatma, he thinks, I don't want mukti, I don't want moksha, I don't want nirvana, I want to serve you. And so then he graduates from the dhyana yoga, which actually it's dhyana yoga mixed with bhakti. Otherwise, without bhakti it cannot be successful. He graduates from the mixed bhakti to Shuddha bhakti, pure bhakti. And once his heart is filled with the pure devotion, then he will never be lost to Krishna and Krishna is never lost to him. Means there's no chance of his ever accepting Sayuja Mukti or Nirvana. This is the meaning of this important verse of chapter 6. And then Krishna gives the conclusion in the last verse of chapter 6, 647. Yoginam api sarvesham madgatein antaratmana shadavan bhajate yomam same yukta atmo umataha. Out of all the different types of yogis, those who with great faith and spirit of service serve me continually within their hearts, they are the greatest of all yogis. They are the best of all. So, these are some of the implications of this verse. Guham, the sutra. Guham pravistav atvano. There are two souls in the heart. So when you just say that sutra, you can say, the first one takes us off the mental platform and the wrong method of inquiry, and to accept the proper method of inquiry. The second one gives us alertness, a consciousness. We are at all times in the presence of God and all things are His energies. The third sutra reminds us, awakens us to the closeness. There is nothing and no one closer to us than Krishna at every moment. But we're ignoring Him. That's what ignorance means, that we're ignoring Him. And so just by, we say the sutras one by one, and you can feel your consciousness rising to higher levels. So guham pravisto atmanoi means I am not alone. That the Supreme Lord is with me at every moment, patiently waiting and desiring to exchange with me more than I desire. This is why He has sent the Vedic message into our life. This is why He sends Guru to us, because He's more eager to meet with us than we are eager to meet with Him. So now we come to the fourth sutra. Api samradane pratyakshat. Api means certainly or even. Samradane means in radhana means worship, devotion, service. That's why the full energy of Krishna is called Radha. Because she is in the embodiment of Radhana. Loving service. And the prefix sam means complete. So samradhane. In the state of complete absorption in adoration, worship, devotion and service. Pratyaksh. Pratyaksh means direct perception. Aksha means eyes. So that which appears directly before your eyes is pratyaksh. Pratyakshat means from direct perception. So, in essence, by complete devotion, even the soul of all reality, the Supreme Lord, becomes directly perceivable, directly visible to us. So, here Sutra 4 gives us the Abhideya Tattva, or the sadhana. It's good to know that Krishna is there in our heart. That's good to know. However, we can't see Him. So we need to know, how can we see Him? What is the process by which we can see Him? So this sutra gives the conclusion. Api samradhane pratyakshat. Certainly, api samradhana, by the complete expression of adoration, devotion, service, radhana, pratyaksha, one has direct perception. This is also discussed by Krishna in Bhagavad Gita chapter 9. Chapter 9, there are 18 chapters, so it's right in the middle of the Gita. So just as in a treasure chest, there's a lid and a bottom, and the treasure's in the middle. So the great treasure of Bhagavad Gita is in chapter 9. So that chapter is entitled Bhakti Yoga. So in the beginning of that chapter, Shri Krishna says, Raja Vidya, Raja Guhyam. This is the king of all knowledge. I've told you about Karma Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, every sannyas, Karma Sannyas Yoga, Gyan Yoga, and Vishad Yoga. So many things I've described. Now in chapter 9, Krishna said, Raja Vidya, Raja Guyam, Pavitram Midam Uttamam. This is the king of all knowledge. Raja Guya, this is the greatest of all secrets. Pavitram, it is completely pure. And Uttamam, beyond the touch of mature energy. Pratyakshavagaman dhamyam. By this one attains a direct perception of reality. Susukam. This path is joyful. It is not sukam, joyful. Susukam. Exquisitely joyful. Su is a prefix which indicates beauty. And it's an intensifier. So it's intensely and exquisitely joyful and beautiful. Susukam kartum avyayam. Kartum means to do. Avyayam. Avyay means inexhaustible, never ending. And that's really important. Why? Because there's a relationship between sadhan and sadhya. Sadhan is your practice and sadhya is your goal. So these always have a relationship. And on all paths, when the sadhana reaches the sadhya, it stops. You see, let's say karma. You do an activity to get something, and when you've got it, you stop doing that activity. You want to live in the Bahamas. Okay? So your sadhana to get that is you are here and you work so hard, and when you've got enough money to retire in there, then you stop your work and you go there. So the sadhana and the sadhya, the method, the process and the goal you want to attain, they're different from each other. So in all the different spiritual paths we see that that also holds true. For example, a person's sadhana is, say, the gyan, knowledge. And by this they want to attain mukti, liberation. So they're studying the Vedas, chanting mantras and everything, and then when they get liberation and they enter into Brahman, Nirvana, then they don't do their Vedic study or anything anymore. And so we see there's a difference between the sadhana and the sadhya. So wherever there's a difference between the practice and the goal, there is duality. It is not absolute. So only the path of bhakti is absolute, because the process to attain the goal and the goal are the same. The process is you serve, and when you get there, you serve. The process is to be devoted, and when you get there, you're devoted. The process is to sing. When you get there, you will sing even more, and more sweetly. You see? So only an absolute process, only by an absolute process can one attain the absolute. And therefore bhakti is the path. And so this sutra is telling us, api samradhane pratyakshat. Oh, I was explaining the second verse of chapter 9 of Bhagavad Gita. Susukam kartum abhyayam. Krishna said, this is the king of knowledge, this is the king of secrets, it's supremely pure, it's beyond matter, it gives you direct perception of reality, it's full of joy, and it goes on forever. So by saying that this knowledge which he is now giving, which is the chapter on bhakti, goes on forever, means it's not something that you do to get something else. But you do bhakti now, and when you get there you do bhakti, therefore this path is beyond duality, it's absolute. So api samradhane pratyakshat. I am going to stop there. We're saving one sutra for the next lecture. Your homework is to memorize the first 4 sutras, the Sanskrit and the English. And if you got the recording or you noted down the meaning of each word, that will be helpful as well. And in the beginning of the next lecture we'll test you, and those who pass will learn the meaning of sutra number 5. Now don't think it's tough, because there are 550 sutras of Vedanta, and I've just boiled it down to 5 for you to make it very easy. So this is probably as accessible as it could possibly be. Anything short of this there would be something missing. But I feel that in these 5, all the essential principles of sambandha, the context of who we are, our relationship with reality, abhideya, the process, and also prayojan, the goal of life, all these 3 principles are explained here in just 5 sutras. And so it's worthwhile to remember them. And each day, it's just like an aeroplane. An aeroplane is flying, but the pilot is always there, or even if it's on autopilot, it's always shifting the course of because the plane is going this way and it always veers off a little bit, and the autopilot or the pilot manually brings it back on course. Then the plane goes this way and they bring it back. So like that. The trajectory of our life is like that, and it requires constant attention. And so each day there are certain mantras that we remember each day to adjust our trajectory, that we're always on course towards the goal of our life. So each day you can remember these sutras, just to get the right orientation for the day and adjust the consciousness that you're right on target for where we're going to attain the goal of life. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Are there any questions?
you say the 5 sutras each day? What if you say them in English and not in Sanskrit? Is it better to say in Sanskrit?
Sure. If you say in English, it's also okay, but there's a special potency, because I'm giving you the sutras like mantras, and so there's a power in the vibration. Also, taraka patishtanat atmakrite parinamat. The words and the reality are non-different. So if you say them, at first you remember the meaning, but after some time the sutras themselves will manifest the reality that they're describing. They're non-different from the reality they're describing as well. And also, as you develop in your Vedic education, you'll come to be acquainted with these Sanskrit words. They have other dimensions and associations with them. And so all of the many meanings which are present in the sutras, those meanings will also be there for you. And that will never be there in just one English translation. So I'm not seeing where you are now, I'm seeing where you'll be 5 years from now, 10 years from now. If you make a foundation in this, you'll be able to have such a much more profound appreciation of the whole subject. I think Vera already knows all these words. She probably knows the sutras too. Yes.
I think it's worth to mention that yesterday Ben wrote commentary on Vedanta Sutra.
Yes.
Which is Srimad Bhagavatam.
It will come in. Did you see the last sutra? It will come. The last sutra is about Leela. So, step by step.
Do we have a spare one of these, Prem?
That's the last one that I just gave. Yeah. There we go. And I've got a couple of these. Did anyone not get this? You missed all the Qatar on that subject. You won't. It'll just be like gobbledygook probably, without the.
I'll listen to the tape.
Any other question?
By somebody's music.
So, this is Swadhyay. What we are doing now is Swadhyay, study. It's very wonderful. In this studying, you will discover new, profound plane of peace and clarity. And it will turn into Gyan, awareness. And then that Gyan will turn into Vigyan, also, realization. And it will take you by surprise. Someone can say, yes, I know. Paramatma is everywhere. But when you see Paramatma, then you realize, oh. He said that when the devotee sees the form of the Supreme Lord, he apologizes. Please forgive me for comparing your eyes to a lotus flower. That is an insult. Your eyes are so beautiful. Please forgive me for the offense of, in my ignorance, comparing your complexion to that of a fresh rain cloud illuminated by a flash of lightning. So beautiful. When the Vigyan, the realization comes. So we'll sing a little kirtan. That will keep everyone warm. And then we'll go inside on a prasadam. And perhaps we can have some discussion there because it's getting chilly here. in D. That second tune that we were doing was in D. The first one was in C sharp, and this one is in D, I think. Okay. We'll see. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Rama Rama. Oh, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Nitai Gaur Sitana